So what we're going to get into next, though, is researching the topic. And we're going to talk about why we research.
Before we really get into talking about the the fine points of research, you all got this packet, right? Articles on GMOs. And did Professor Inouye give you an evidence packet as well? I think it's electronic, probably. The email. Okay. So I'm going to preface everything we do tonight with your homework for this evening is to read through both this and your evidence packet, okay? Start with these articles, because these articles will give you some background reading on the topic, and then the evidence packet are pieces of evidence formatted specifically for debate rounds.
And some of them come from these articles. So if you read this before you read the evidence packet, it will all make more sense as you're reading the evidence packet. But if you do it the other way, it might seem weird.
Right. And in a little bit, we will talk to you about how to format pieces of evidence specifically for a debate round, how to turn them into what we call a card. Okay? But before we do that, let's talk about why we even bother.
So what do you think? Why do you think research is important? And it's something we need to do, especially in debate. Find the proof. So to find that evidence, those warrants, so that you can support what you want to say. Just like what we talked about with the claims and everything. Why else? Exactly. So if we do the evidence, you can compare whether your evidence or your opponent's evidence is better based on your research you've done before you even enter the round, right? So yes, that's a great reason.
With that in mind, holding people to research is a great way to just make sure that your opponent isn't making things up. If your opponent has to speak from what his or her research is saying, you know that it is tied to something. It's not just something that they are pretending is true. So pretend you were debating me, for example, on this topic about genetically modified organisms. Well, you know that I'm a grad student. I study communication at Illinois State University. And if I stand up and in my speech I start talking to you about how I did these studies and I found out that genetically modified organisms are bad for your health, how would I know, right? I could just be making that up. So if everything is tied to evidence, you are held to a standard to ground your arguments in facts. And like Yaya said, it's like finding something to prove what you are saying.
So you want to make sure that whenever you're researching one side, you're also researching the opposite so that you know or hope to know what your opponent is going to say, so you're ready for during the cross-ex time to answer that question because you know it, you've already done all the research, or for when they make their argument in their speech, you can respond to it with more evidence in following speeches.
Exactly. I mean, for example, one of the articles in your evidence packet, the fourth article, the name of the article is Genetically Modified Foods, Harmful or Helpful. Okay, pretend that you're researching for the affirmative. Well, you're not just going to read the portion of this article about how GMOs are harmful. You want to read the parts that say that it is helpful too. For the reasons that Yaya said, you want to know what arguments your opponent could bring up. So you're not completely surprised when the debate round actually happens. A lot of articles will do this where they will present both sides of the position to you. They might conclude one way or another, but they'll give an overview of both positions. So make sure that you read both positions because you might find some potential arguments from the other side.
Yeah. Okay, so the basics of how to research. I'm going to guess that since everyone's in college, you've done some research at some point in your life, correct? You've all researched something somewhere to get to this point. You've probably written a paper about something. So the first step is what? Brainstorming, okay? where you sit down, you look at the topic, and you just, off the top of your head, come up with ideas. So with GMOs, we had the health effects, how it could be bad, and we had, oh, you had an idea too about GMOs. Do you remember? What was it? Okay, well, let's go back to smoking. We're gonna go back to the smoking idea. So you're sitting there and you see the topic of smoking, and that it should be banned in Japan. So you would want to think of some things that would be good about banning smoking. And we say that it reduces cancer, that we decrease secondhand smoke. And then, so you have all of those ideas. But then you want to think about, what about the other side of the topic, right? So we come up with, like Jake said, all the people that work for the tobacco companies. Oh, now they're not going to have a job if we can't sell the cigarettes. And then that those companies, they pay taxes to the government, and so the government's losing all that money too. So we brainstormed these ideas. Okay, that's step 1 in research. Think of things. Okay? So step 2 is to create a plan. How are you going to do it? What are you going to do? Are you just going to go out there and run around and hope that you run into something? Or will you go and have a plan for when you're going to research? Well, the best way is to set forth a plan. And the best places to look are going to be in your libraries, in newspapers, journal articles, so academic journals that have been published, news stories. So what's the leading news program in Japan? Do you know that gives the news? Do they have a name?
Like newspaper?
Like a newspaper or a TV show that talks about the news? Like what's going on? Okay, so you could go to those places, like their websites, and see what they're saying about the topic too, to start there. So you want to have a plan. Where are you going to look? So that's where you'd want to look.
So next we come across the issue of, okay, so we have some topics in mind, some areas for research, then we have a plan of attack, some places we know we could look. So we start looking. You want to look for elements in your research, and when you're looking through these journal articles, you're looking through these newspaper articles to see what you're really looking for are elements of those stock issues that we talked about, right? So things like harms, things like significant issues that are in the news that surround your topic, things like proposals for policies or plans that could or could not solve a problem. You should be thinking in terms of those debate ideas while you read these articles to see if you can nail down potential ideas, things that you could expand into actual debate evidence. Is this something that proves, is this an article that proves a benefit to banning smoking in Japan? So that would be a harm, right? Something in the harm direction. Is there an article that talks about how the tobacco industry would be crushed if Japan stopped selling cigarettes? If so, that's a position for the negative. So start thinking of your articles in terms of what can they do for my position in the debate as it relates specifically to the resolution we have. Does that make sense? So think in terms of those stock issues. Next is the idea of opposition research, which we've talked about a little bit, right? When we read an article, keep an eye out for positions that your opponents on the other side of the debate might bring up, and make sure that you are prepared for what they are about to say. So that way, when you go into a debate round, you have to worry less about your opponent bringing up some argument that you're not prepared for at all, something that completely surprises you. If you've done your research and you are well read on the topic, chances are there is nothing that they can say to you that you aren't already expecting a little bit, right? So that's what we mean when we say opposition research. And finally, the last element is staying current, staying up to date. especially with policy debate, and as I understand with parliamentary debate, you can't just do research once at the beginning of the year and stop. You need to constantly be looking at news. You need to stay up to date with what is happening in the world. What are things that my government is doing? What are other governments doing that relate to my plan? For example, if the United States all of a sudden banned the import, the production, and the sale of GMOs, that would have a tremendous effect on how the international community thought about GMOs. So that could really affect the way our debate topic worked, right? If we wanted to talk about the international effects of Japan banning those things about GMOs. So be aware of things that are going on in the world that relate to your topic. Okay? So those are really the basics of research. Like Shanna said, you definitely want to make sure that you have credible sources, just like you would for any paper that you would write in college. You don't want to cite Wikipedia, right? What would happen if you cited Wikipedia for a paper in class? Well, at least when my students do it, I draw a huge red X across the citation, and I write Y really big, and I take lots of points off when Wikipedia is cited. If you do that, and your opponent calls you out and says, hey, this awesome argument that you have, the evidence, that's from Wikipedia, your judge is gonna shake their head and frown a little bit and take that into consideration when they're looking to see how the debate progresses. So you want credible sources, okay? That's something that we really want to emphasize. So, no, you're fine. So, like we said, there are a lot of potential places that you can look for, you know, journal articles, newspaper articles are great. Something else that you can look for is if you know of often this is a professor or a politician or something like that who is an expert on a given subject. Look for interviews with that person online and see if there are published interviews. Look and see what they have to say about that topic, as long as it's an area of their expertise, and use that as evidence, because that's another great way to get very qualified information.
Another way you can do interviews is you can email, like if it's a company or an organization or even a professor you can email them and ask them questions and see if they'll respond to you. And if they respond, you can use that as well for your evidence. I've emailed lots of people with questions that I couldn't find on the internet about something, and use that email as evidence and around, and it's great because it's from the people in that field that are constantly working with the topic, so they know it very well. And they'll usually, if you introduce yourself, hi, my name is Shanna Carlson. I'm with the debate team at Illinois State University, and I have a couple of questions for you if you don't mind answering them to help us with our topic this year. And then I ask however many questions I have. And most of the time, it may take them a while, but most of the time they will email you back. And so that's fantastic evidence that no one else is going to have access to until you have it. And so you get to be the holder of prime evidence that no one else has. It's kind of a moment.
So, the trick is when it comes to policy debate, okay? So we're preparing for our first policy debate tournament, and we have stacks of great articles that really support our point. Well, we need to convert them into in-round, ready-to-use debate evidence, or what we call cards. Because the way policy debate works is you don't just, the first time you introduce it, you don't just refer to a piece of evidence or an article that you read. You have to read an excerpt from it, okay? So we have a special format for what that looks like. Now, I know I asked this at the beginning, but I'm gonna ask again. You all have this packet of journal articles about GMOs. Professor Inouye should have sent you an electronic evidence packet, right? Okay. All right, if you look at that, The evidence in there probably looks pretty strange. Okay? And
It's not printed.
It's not printed right now. It should be in your emails. And it probably looks a little something like this. Not without these little lines here. Okay. So what we do when you find an article that you want to use for debate, right? So say we have this awesome article from Professor Inouye, and what you want to use from this article is he has a couple of lines that explain why GMOs are bad. Okay. Oh, up top.
Is that easier to see up top? Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. About why GMOs are bad. Okay. So that part of the article, you want to copy and paste that into Microsoft Word or whatever word processor you're using. Now, like we said, you want to be prepared to actually read an excerpt from the evidence in your debate round. So, if this right here is the chunk of space that we've copied from the article itself, you underline the portions that you actually want to read in the round. And you want to make sure that it sounds like a sentence, even if you're skipping words in between. So, for example, we're pretending that Professor Inouye wrote in an article, personally, I find that GMO foods are disgusting and can even cause illness. Well, we only care about what Professor Inouye says about the health effects. So we underline GMO foods can even cause illness. Do you see how that works? It's still a sentence, but it is a small excerpt from the whole article. Okay? So, that's what we call the actual text of the card. Up top, though, you see eating GMO food is bad for you. That is a line that we use to introduce a piece of evidence. And it is called a tag or a tagline. We read the tag to explain to our opponents and to our judges and possibly an audience, if there is one, what this piece of evidence that we're about to read really says. If you want them to take away one thing from the evidence, what is it that you want them to know about it? And that's called the tagline. So here our tag is eating GMO food is bad for you, and we have a card text that says that, right, from the article.
So another way to think about it, the tag is also your claim. So it's just like when we're talking about claim, evidence, and warrants. This is your claim. What is that you're trying to prove through evidence and warrants? And that's something that it's your own words. It's what you make up. Well, not make up, but what you would say before you use someone else's words.
Okay. Are you with me so far? Does that make sense? Okay. So the next part, so we have our tagline. You have to cite your evidence. Okay. There is only one little bit of a citation that you actually read aloud when you present this. So you just need to say the last name of the author or the name of the organization that you cited from, that wrote the information you're using, and the year it was published. So if Professor Inouye wrote this article in 2014, all I need to say is, eating GMO food is bad for you, from Inouye 14. And you have formally cited the piece of evidence, and then you can read it. That is all you need to say when you are reading a piece of evidence, but you have to have with the evidence a little bit more of a citation. So that's why we put a little bit extra in parentheses. The reason we have the rest of the citation is so that your opponents have the opportunity to look up that information. Okay? So, yes, right. So, up here we have the name and the last name and the year. That's what you need to say actually when you present a piece of evidence in a debate round. In the parentheses, you need to have the first name, their qualifications, the date. Sometimes it's not available. Sometimes all you see is the year. If that's the way it is, that's fine. But if you're using a newspaper article and it actually tells you the day and month that it was published, include that as well. So the date, the article title, and then where it was actually published. So if the title of this article was Why GMOs Are Awful, and Professor Inouye published it on gmos.com, that's the way it would look. Here is a trick. A lot of debaters don't do this, but when an opponent reads a piece of evidence and they give it to you, look in the parentheses, look in the part of the citation that they don't read to you, okay? Especially the qualifications. Because say you're debating against me, and we are debating about the Prime Minister. And I have a piece of evidence that says the Prime Minister is the worst leader Japan has ever had, okay? And you look in the qualifications and you see that the person who wrote my piece of evidence is a member of he's a political leader of the opposing party. Why is that a problem? It's not an objective source. It's somebody who is biased, right? So that's something that they're not going to tell you, right? Because they are trying to sneak it past you. But if you are reading in parentheses, what's in parentheses to see who they really are, you sometimes are going to have the opportunity to challenge your opponent's evidence. And if you take out their evidence, they don't have an argument anymore, okay? Remember when we talked about the Toolman model? For an argument to exist, you need to have claims, you need to have a claim, you need to have evidence, and you need to have a warrant. If it is missing any of those three things, it's not a complete argument. And that's something that you can point out to the judge. Okay? So always be looking out for that. Do you have any questions about this? You'll see a lot of examples of this when you look in your evidence packet that you've got electronically. Shanna and I cut how many pages?
40 to 50.
Yeah, there are 50 pages of these in that evidence packet. When you go ahead, just so you hear me.
You have the,
Excellent.
Yay! So we can show you. Awesome. Okay. So, yeah, this is it. So this is a printed out version, and I'll show you. So, for example, this one, the claim says, and I'll come show you, that Japan imports 44 different types of genetically modified crops and has strict testing policies. I don't think you guys have this one. So that would be the claim. That would be my tagline that I read, right? Then it's from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Foreign Agricultural Service, from 2003, okay? And then, so I've got a lot of text here. If you look, this is the card, but I am only reading what's underlined and bold and bigger. You don't have it. You don't have this. So then I would, after I read this top part, I would read that, and that's my card. Does this make sense? So this whole packet is full of those. So this is what you'll be, after you read the articles, this is what you'll read through. Because this will be, you do have it. This will be the evidence that you're running and reading when we actually debate. So you'll be able to, also if you come across words that are really difficult to read, you can ask us and we can tell you how to pronounce them, because some of them are really hard, even in English, who've been speaking it for a long time. So we can help you with that as well. So yeah, so this is the tag. This here is the citation, and then this is the card, but you only read the bigger text and the underlined text. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So this would be your tagline, and this is where you got it from, who wrote it, and then the underlined words are what you would read aloud. Make sense? So yeah, you've already got it. No. So I think most of you should have it available online.
So,
Thank
you
you.
might hear us use this phrase when we talk about preparing research for debate. Like we said, this is called a card. The act of formatting evidence or formatting an article to look like this is called cutting. So you cut cards. Okay. So if you ever hear us use the expression, we cut this evidence, that's what we're talking about, is we found a bunch of articles and made them look like this.
And cut means we took out the parts that are not important.
Right.
The words that you don't need, that were
Right.
fluff.
Like for example, you'll see that a lot here. So if in this example, all we want to say is that GMO food is bad for your health. So we don't need to know that it's disgusting and tastes bad, right? So we don't say that. We just underline the part that says GMO foods can cause illness. So we cut the stuff that doesn't matter out of it.
Now, however, the one thing when you are cutting evidence and doing this is you don't want to, so let's say that the word okay. Let's say that he actually said, personally, I do not find that GMO foods, okay, and we don't underline the words do not, but we make it sound like he said this, that you don't want to do that.
That's cheating.
Yes.
That's bad.
That's bad. And so when you're debating, this is hardly ever done. But look at the smaller words that aren't underlined to make sure that your opponent isn't doing this. Where they're not leaving out words like, this does not solve, or this is not bad, and they're just, this is bad. So you always want to make sure that you keep it to what the original author is saying and don't change their meaning.
Think of it as trying to make the content of the article thinner, not changing the content of the article.
Right.
Okay?
It's like paraphrasing. That makes, saying it in your own words, basically what you're doing. We have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Okay. We've about run out of time for today. At first, we just want to say thank you. We're so excited that you're here taking this workshop, and we're so happy for the opportunity to come here and meet all of you and talk to you about something that we love so much.
It is our life.
Right.
This is what we do. We love it.
And yes.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Would you mind explaining what should I do while reading this?
Okay.
article
Yeah.
again?
When you're reading the articles, what you want to be looking for is, for example, in the first one where it says it's for the approval process, the Japanese case. You'd want to be reading that so you understand how GMOs, what's happening with them in Japan right now. How are they approved? Where can they be grown or imported? What's going on with them? So this is just to understand how it happens. And then look for, as you're reading the other 4, see if you can find some arguments about why they're good or why they're bad. And start being able to find them in the evidence. You don't have to cut them, but if you want to highlight or underline for your own benefit, you can start the process to start to learn how to do it while you're reading.
I think that that's a great idea. I definitely recommend that you take a highlighter or a pen and start underlining the things that you think are important, just to get in the habit of thinking in terms of how can I turn this into a card.
Okay. And so this is literally all this is background on what's going on. These were the articles that Jake and I read before we even started crafting anything. We made sure we understood to the best of our abilities what was going on and why GMOs were good or why they were bad before we went out and found even more articles. So these were the ones we thought were the most helpful to read in full, complete. And they're all from academic sources. So we found them in journals and stuff. So does that make sense? So just read it for background, and then the electronic packet, make sure you read through that and you understand. Write down any questions you have about words so you can ask us tomorrow, or ask us any questions you have about what that really means. So make sure you know what the case is, which would be the 1AC. It's the first affirmative. It's what we should do. And then make sure you understand what the negative is saying, why they're saying it's bad, why the plan would not be a good idea. Okay? Is it easy enough?
Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
We will see you all tomorrow.
hopefully you enjoyed today.
We're sorry it was a little hectic.
Yeah.
With illnesses and whatnot, but